Sif Hey. Kol ha'chemet beisei kelev shel chaveri kol davar she'efsher sheyikachem mimenu rak she'ein bedaiti l'machram. Anyone who covets, who desires someone else's house or kelim that belong to them, or anything that it might theoretically be possible to buy it from them. However, the owner has no intention of selling it. And he sent friends and different people to exert pressure on the owner to sell that which he doesn't necessarily want to sell, or he himself pressured him to sell. One violates the isser of loy Sachmod by doing so. One does not violate this law until they actually take the object that they desired, that they coveted. Like the pasuk says, the pasuk is talking about destroying Avodah Zarah. So there's a mitzvah to destroy Avodah Zarah, and the pasuk says, don't covet the gold and silver that the Avodah Zarah is made out of, and take them for yourselves. Rather, you should destroy them. But we see from the pasuk that you're only over on Sachmod if you actually take it. However, from the moment that one becomes persuaded themselves to come up with a plan or scheme, some kind of way how they're going to acquire the article of their desire, then they're ever not on Sachmod but on Sava. Because taiva is only in the heart. Taiva does not involve any actions, any actual taking. You know that the Aseret Adibros appear twice in Torah, once in Parshas Yisro, once in Parshas Vaskanan. In Parshas Yisro it says Lashon Sachmod, Parshas Vaskanan it says Lashon Sava. So over here the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch say this as well, that are telling us that these are really two different isurim, Sava and Sachmod. V'ataiva maybe l'dei chimud, v'achimud maybe l'dei gezel, v'gezel maybe l'dei shvichos damim. Taiva l'sesava leads to chimud, desiring to take something, leads to actually bringing about a way to take it. V'achimud maybe l'dei gezel, and chimud leads to gezel, because if you want something so badly and your plan doesn't work to convince the owner to sell it, so then one can end up stealing it. And gezel leads to shvichos damim, because if the victim of the attempted robbery tries to stand in the way, so then that may lead to shvichos damim. One who desires that which belongs to his fellow over b'lav echad is over on one lav. And if he actually acquired that which he coveted, whether based on his own pressure that he exerted or by sending other people to exert their influence, then one is over on both lavin of Sachmod and of Sava. That's the sif inside. So now to discuss a couple of details that we went over quickly in the sif. First of all, kol ha'chemet beisei kelev shel chaveri. Chaveri means another yid, as we discussed in previous shiurim. We're not going to get so much into it now. We discussed it at length previously, that Sachmod does not apply to a guy. The pasuk says but the pasuk says the word reyacha by Sachmod, and we already learned that when it says reyacha, it applies only to another yid. The Alter Rebbe explains this at length in Kuntra Sachar and Hilchos Pesach. For now, let's leave it at that. The next detail is something that you might be able to buy. The Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Shin Nun Tes stells on this lashon efsher sheyikchem, on the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam that says efsher sheyiknehu mimenu, a similar lashon, and he says as follows: nearly, what is the Rambam referring to with the diuk halashin sheyikneu mimenu. Says shekiven l'mashadorsha b'mechilta. He's referring to a drasha in the Mechilta. Mechilta says loy sachmed klal. The Torah says loy sachmed. That's a klal. That's a general statement. Then the Torah says loy sachmed beis reyacha loy sachmed sheri chameri. Yeah, bayis sada ve'eved ve'omer v'sher v'chamer prat. Says a lot of details. So we have a klal and then we have a prat. The koil asher l'reyacha chazer v'kolel. And then the pasuk concludes the koil asher l'reyacha. You should not covet anything that belongs to your fellow. That's a klal. Klalu pratu klal. Yatadon elokeina prat. Ma prat, says the Mechilta, davar shehu koina umakna. So when we have a klal and a prat and a klal, the rule is that the klal has to match the pratim. So just like the Mechilta says, just like the pratim, bayis, sada, a house, a field, a servant, a donkey, are things that can be purchased, can be sold, and bought in a sale. So too, anything the Isra Sachmod only applies to anything that can be bought and sold. Ubir Adavar, says the Aruch HaShulchan, Nirish im Reuven lamad eza chachma ve'eza malacha. If Reuven knows a certain chachma or a certain malacha, a certain thing that he knows how to do, it's not something that you can buy and sell. You can't buy and sell knowledge. V'Shimon chamad b'libay chachma zu malacha zu, and Shimon really wants to learn this chachma, to learn this knowledge. He wants Reuven to teach him the masechta that he knows, or the whichever skill that he knows. And he put a lot of pressure on Reuven, and he sent other people to put pressure on Reuven until Reuven finally agreed to teach him. I would say, says the Aruch HaShulchan, that's also leisachmed. And therefore the Torah says, klal u'prata klal. Only things that can be bought and sold are included in the Isra of leisachmed. When Reuven has it, Shimon can't have it. A physical object can only be owned by one person. But chachma, malacha, knowledge can be by two people at the same time, and therefore the Isra of leisachmed does not apply to it, and one is permitted to pressure someone else, obviously in a nice way, not with threats or abuse, but in a polite way, to teach them something that they want to learn. Continues the Alter Rebbe, what is the Isser of leisachmed? Hirba lavreim, he sends many friends, or or he pressures him. We know the word hifzer, vayifzer appears many times in Tanakh. Vayifzer means to ask many times, to put a lot of pressure. So what exactly is the gather of lahafzer? How many times do you have to ask before it comes into the gather of lahafzer? So in Shalos HaTshuvos B'Tzelach Chachma Chela Gimel Simon Gimel, he speaks about an interesting shaila that he has. There was a community where, for whatever reason, nobody in the community, all the balabatim in the community, I guess they realized when it was too late, I don't know if it's Mamash Erev Pesach or a little bit before, that they have no shmur matzahs. Maybe they had regular matzahs, but they didn't have shmur matzahs. Or not regular matzahs, other matzahs, but they didn't have shmur matzahs. The only person in the community who had shmur matzahs was the Rav. So some of the balabatim went over to the Rav, and they asked him to share with them some of his shmur matzahs, and he agreed. He gave them whatever he kept for himself, the bare minimum which he needed, and everything else he gave away. So the shaila that he's dealing with in B'Tzelach Chachma is there an issue here of leisachmed? So first he goes into another interesting discussion of, is leisachmed apply? Is it only when you want something for yourself, for your personal use? That's leisachmed. But maybe if you want it for a mitzvah, that's not leisachmed. If somebody has a matzah or a shayfer and I don't have one, can I pressure them to give it to me? Maybe that's not leisachmed. So he says, in theory, that is also leisachmed. That would also be an issue of like Sachmod. Doesn't make a difference if you need it for a mitzvah or for another purpose. If you're pressuring someone to give you something that they have that they're not willing to give away, then that would be an issue of Sachmod. But over here, he says there was no issue of Sachmod because Sachmod has to be hifzer by, that he pressured him. But over here, they asked and he agreed right away. That's not called haftzar. That's not called pressure. So that's not an issue of Sachmod at all. And then he says even if you need to ask twice, that's Pashtus also not in the category of mafzer, and that would still be permitted. He brings a raya over there from Hilchos Gezeilah, but whatever, a nice raya that he brings, but that's what he says. In the Sefer Shari Tshuva from Rabbeinu Yoina, he does, however, write that there is a situation where you could have Sachmod, where you could have Sachmod even without hifzer, even without pressure, even without asking too many times, and that is read the lashon somebody who desires to take something that belongs to someone else, and he's an ish nichbot, he's a respectable person, he's a chashav person. If he's going to ask something, nobody's going to turn him down, because if the president of the United States walks into your house and asks, "Is this for sale?" and he's serious, you're not going to say no, because even though he only asked once, he didn't pressure you, but because of his persona, because of who he is, him asking even once is already a pressure. So says Rabbeinu Yoina, it's usher for such a person, for a chashav person to ask for someone else to sell him something or to give him something, unless he knows that he's actually going to give it to him willingly. You're allowed to go into a store and ask, is this for sale? Because things in the store, you don't have to ask, it's for sale. But to go into someone's house and ask them for their personal objects if they're for sale, unless you really know that they would willingly sell it, then you can't ask even once. If you are a chashuv person that you know that the person you're asking will not be able to turn you down, even by asking once. Derech Agav, Rabbeinu Yoina mentioned over here that Sachmod is not only pressuring someone to sell you something, it's also to pressure someone to give you something as a gift. The Chafetz Chaim is a sefer called Sefer HaMitzvos Katzer, and Leisasa Mem, he writes the same thing. He explains what the Isra of Sachmod is, and he gives an example. What's a common example of Sachmod? Who makes demands or strongly worded requests from his future father-in-law before the chasana, planning to give him certain things, something that they didn't agree upon when they were writing the Tanaim. Even though the shver does as the son-in-law asks, the chassan is over on Sachmod. So you see that the Chafetz Chaim also learns that it's not necessarily a sale; it's even a gift. And Pisvara, there's no reason to be mechalek adarab. If pressuring someone to sell you something where they get something in return is an isser of Sachmod, halachas kama v'kama, that to pressure them to give you something where they get nothing in return is an isser of Sachmod. It's also, I think it's meduyik in the lashon of the Rambam. The Rambam says to pressure someone to sell you something is an isser of Sachmod, af al pisha nasan leidasan damim rabim, even though you're going to give him a lot of money for it. He says af al pi. If you don't give him anything, it's an issue. However, in Shalos Shivas Batzela Chachma that we mentioned earlier in the next Simon Memdalad, he brings down some paiskim who say otherwise. He concludes that it's a machlekes paiskim. Okay, you can take a look over there and see for yourself. But Kapanim, the shita of Rabbeinu Yoina and of the Chafetz Chaim is that it doesn't make a difference if it's a sale or a gift, and Lanius Daiti, it's meduyik in the lashon of the Rambam as well. There's another possible form of Sachmod that in the Sefer Piskei Cheshen, Gzela Perak Aleph and Ha'ara Chavav, he brings down, it says Ra'isi Misha Kasav. I don't know who that is, but he says Ra'isi Misha Kasav. I saw those who write that Sachmod pressuring someone also to buy something. not only to sell something, but also to buy something is also in Isser of Le Sachmod, and the Pesach says Venir and Dvar that what he says makes sense, and you should it's best to avoid it. Obviously, anything that's a normal business transaction, if you're a salesperson, you're allowed to offer someone to buy something. But again, everything is like we mentioned earlier, a chash of a person. Everything is lefia Indian. Everything depends on the situation. A chash of a person who you can't turn down. So even without too much pressure, everything depends on the situation. Dealing with the nisa derasa, you have to be careful. But again, so if it's a normal request, a normal business interaction that's not exerting undue pressure, then that's obviously not prohibited. Okay. There's a common, it's known as a scam in the tourist areas where somebody will come up to you and do something for you, polish your shoes, wash the windows of your car without you asking for it, and then demand payment. So that seems to be exactly what the Pesach is referring to, that pressuring someone to buy something that they never wanted to buy is an Isser of Leisachman. And by the way, in the Sefer Chinuch, I don't know how many, I don't think any Yidden are involved in this type of scam, but in the Sefer Chinuch, he says that Isser of Leisachman is prohibited also under Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. It's part of Gzela. So that's that would be, I think, a common example of that. To go back to the normal standard case of Leisachmed, which is pressuring someone to sell something, the shita of the Rambam is that pressuring someone to sell something is in and of itself an isser of leisachmed, even if in the end they agree and they say, they say that in the end, fine, I agree, I want to sell. Nevertheless, getting there was an isser of leisachmed, even though the halacha is, as everyone learns in yeshiva, that somebody who is pressured to sell something and they are coerced, and in the end they agree to sell something under duress or under coercion, the sale is valid al pi halacha. Nevertheless, the shita of the Rambam is, as explained by the Maggid Mishnah over there, that even though the sale is valid, the process of getting there was a process of isser of leisachmid. I'm emphasizing this because the Ravid and other Shainim argue with the Rambam, and they say that if in the end he agrees there's no isser of leisachmid. However, the Shulchan Aruch brings down the lashon of the Rambam almost word for word. So does the Alter Rebbe. Anu ein lanu ela divrei Shulchan Aruch. Just to speak for a minute in general about the isser of leisachmid. The isser of leisachmid, like we just said, pressuring someone to sell something that they didn't want to sell, even if in the end your pressure campaign works and they agree to sell it. Nevertheless, this is us. This, to the best of my knowledge, this is a unique din in halacha that has, as far as I know, and if anyone's listening knows differently, can correct me if I'm wrong, has no parallel, or almost no parallel, in secular law. If you're pressure someone to sell something, as long as, again, no threats, no abuse, but just pressure, asking again and again until they finally agree, that should be fair game. Nevertheless, the Torah tells us that this is us. Just it shows you how far the Torah wants to keep us away from making money on someone else's cheshbon, or taking something that belongs to someone else. The Rebbe it's a Michtav Kollel from Rosh Chodesh Nisan Tafshel Lamed Vav. It's printed in Lakotei Sichos, Chelek Yud Beis, page 160 and on. It's a few pages. I'm just going to read one sentence from the letter. Der center Gebot is Lo Sachmid. The 10th commandment is Lo Sachmid Kol Asher L'Reacha. Rebbe says, Nit nor miternit zu nemen epis was is yanims. Not only you can't take something that belongs to someone else, that's gzeilah. Nor miternit afilu nit glusten derzu. You can't even want to take something that belongs to someone else. And in the ha'ar over there, Rebbe explains, nit glusten, the gamzeh asr min ha-Torah. just wanting to take something without, I want to emphasize what the Rebbe is saying over here because it's a shtickle chiddush. Even before you start making plans how to take it, which isn't leisasava, and even before actually taking it is leisachmid. Rebbe says just the desire to have something that belongs to someone else is asr min hatera. V'aderab zehu ikra mitzvah, and aderab, this is the main mitzvah, is to the main mitzvah, the main avera, is to desire something that belongs to someone else. And there was mitzayin to the Ebenezer and the Rabbonim Bechaya on Shmais over there, which we'll speak more about in a minute. The result of the avera, which only then are you actually over on a lav, is misha shenifta believe over b'leisasava. When you persuade yourself to actually make plans how to actually acquire whatever it is, then one is over on leisasava. It's over gam b'leisachmid. And when you actually take it, then you're over on leisachmid. But even before that, just wanting to take something that belongs to someone else is an isra of leisachmid, which again, as mentioned earlier, goes to show how far the Torah takes it, how far the Torah wants us to stay away from taking something or even wanting to take something that belongs to someone else. Some Mefarshim speak about how is it possible for the Torah to tell you not to want something. It's human nature that if you see something that's nice, you want it. Nevertheless, the Farshim explained that Ebenezer and the Bechai that the Rebbe was mitzayin to, that it's Bechlal not a question. Sefer Chinuch speaks about this as well. That again, for us, this is obvious because we know that that just because you think of something doesn't mean you have to think about it, and so you know. The everyone has a Yetzer Hara, and you might want something, but to entertain that thought, that's not something that you want to do. It's not human nature to want that. Other human nature is mayach shalat alalev b'teldase b'teva yitzirase. And again, that's a lashon from Tanya, but there's a similar lashonis in the Rabbonim Bechaya. It says ikra mitzvah she'yisyoy she'adam yikol ma sheyesh lechaver karka matatlan v'yifana libi min ha'machshavas, is to turn your heart away from this thought. Shelo yachshav behem v'lo yachmedim, not to entertain this thought. The chinuch in mitzvah tafta zayin says also biyad adam limnoya atzmei machshavesa v'tavesa mikol ma she'yis. A person is able to steer their thoughts and their desires away from to whatever you want. And you're, excuse me. And a person has the ability to think about the things that they should be thinking about. The Ibn Ezra gives a nice mashal for this, which the Chagav is just a nice mashal, as he said in Betachin. Says, gives a mashal of a king who has a daughter, and the king has many subjects. This is a regular subject to the king, a regular civilian, does not realistically desire the king's daughter, even though she may be very beautiful and very desirable. He knows that it's never going to happen. This is only a fool would actually actively entertain that chimud, that desire. So says the Ibn Ezra, a person should understand that mizanes of shaladim k'tzuvan lam Rosh Hashanah. He doesn't say those words. He says, everything that a person has is predetermined by Hashem. How much money you're going to have, what objects you're going to have, what wife you're going to have. So to desire something that someone else has that wasn't given to you is even more ridiculous than a peasant desiring the king's daughter, because it's even more far removed. This is the king of the universe, and whatever he didn't decide to give to you, you're not going to get. So therefore, a person has to have betachin in Hashem, that Hashem is going to give them what they deserve, what's coming to them, and everything else, it's not something worth dwelling on or thinking about, and that is the and to entertain that unthinkable thought is an Isser of Leisach. Just to speak about a few more Prati Dinim of Leisachmid, the Alter Rebbe says over here, somebody is not, one is not, does not violate Isser of Leisachmid unless they actually take that which they desired. However, somebody who sees something that someone else has and they don't necessarily want to take away the specific object that their friend has, they say, I see someone who has this in this car, this in this phone, and I also want to have that car, that phone, that whatever other object. So there's no issue to go to a store and buy the same thing, even if it's not necessarily readily available and it requires some tachbulis and some scheming and some planning how to get it. But again, that's not an Isra of Leisachmid. Leisachmid means to take away something that belongs to someone else. But to want something that belongs to someone else and to go and get it for yourself from the dealer who sells it, that is not an issue. In another example is also just a more abstract thing. I want to be as wealthy as Pliny, as whoever. I want to be as this, as whatever, and then I can come up with a way and how to get there without, in an honest, ehrliche way, without taking away something that belongs to someone else. That's not an issue of Leisachmid. In the Sefer Imri Yaakov, it takes it a step further. We'll say what he says. He says that even if you want something in general, you don't want it because this and this person has it, so I want what he has. I want this and this thing in general. I don't care where I get it from. And I see that someone I know has it, so I'm allowed to ask him to sell it to me, and I'm even allowed to pressure him to sell it to me. He admits over there that he hasn't found this clearly stated in Peskim. He says, "After that, if you want to be Mitzvah of the Ravid, who says that if in the end he agrees, there's no Isser of Leisachmid, to rely on those things together." I think we will leave it as a tzarichin, and leave it as that. And with that, we'll stop for today. And the next year we'll continue with Sivav, which starts a new sugya of Hachzaras, Hashavas, Gazela, and Gneva. So, unless there are any questions, we'll conclude for today.